Marcus Kane stood at the observation window of his private office on Nexus Prime Station and watched the stars shimmer in the endless black. He had built an empire that stretched across 12 star systems. Kane Galactic Industries was more than just a company. It was a symbol of what humanity could achieve when they reached for the impossible. Marcus had come from nothing. He grew up in the slums of New Chicago, where clean water was a luxury and hope was even rarer. His mother worked 3 jobs to keep food on their table. His father died in a factory accident when Marcus was only 7 years old. But Marcus had something that poverty could not take away. He had a brilliant mind and an iron will. He studied engineering by candlelight when the power was cut off in their apartment. He built his first quantum processor from scrap parts he found in junkyards. By the time he was 25, he had patents that made him a millionaire. By 30, he was a billionaire. Now at 42, he controlled technology that powered half the ships in the known galaxy. His quantum drive engines were the fastest and most reliable in existence. Every major fleet from Earth to the outer colonies used his designs. He employed over 50,000 beings across dozens of worlds. Humans worked alongside Centaurians, Valkyrians, and species from planets whose names most humans could not pronounce. Marcus believed in one simple principle. Talent was talent. It did not matter what color your skin was or which planet you came from. If you could do the job, you deserved the chance. That belief made him rich, but more importantly, it made him respected. Alien governments trusted him because he treated their people fairly. Human colonies wanted his business because he brought prosperity wherever he went. Kane Galactic Industries was proof that humanity had evolved beyond the petty prejudices that once held them back on Earth. Or so Marcus thought. 3 weeks ago, his head of corporate security, Commander Lisa Torres, brought him a report that made his blood run cold. She had been investigating complaints from rejected job applicants. At first, the complaint seemed random. A Valkyrian engineer who claimed she was dismissed without proper review. A human from the Mars colonies who said his interview was cut short for no reason. A Centaurian pilot who felt he was judged before he even sat down. Lisa dismissed them initially as sour grapes from unsuccessful candidates. Everyone who got rejected had an excuse, but then Lisa noticed a pattern. The complaints were not random at all. They came from specific departments. They involved specific managers, and they all had one thing in common. The rejected applicants were highly qualified people who did not fit a certain mold. Lisa dug deeper. She pulled hiring records for the past 3 years. She analyzed interview notes. She cross-referenced performance reviews with demographic data. What she found was damning. In several divisions of Kane Galactic Industries, qualified candidates were being rejected at alarming rates. The rejections followed clear patterns. Certain managers hired only people who looked like them, talked like them, came from the same backgrounds. Other qualified applicants were turned away with vague excuses about cultural fit or team dynamics. The discrimination was subtle enough to avoid legal problems, but obvious enough once you knew where to look. Some managers were rejecting aliens simply for being aliens. Others were discriminating against humans based on their ethnicity or where they were born. Marcus felt sick when he read Lisa's report. He had built this company on principles of fairness and merit. He had given opportunities to people others had written off. He had proven that diversity made businesses stronger, not weaker. And now he learned that some of his own managers were betraying everything he stood for. They were using his company, his name, to perpetuate the same old hatreds and biases that humanity had supposedly left behind. The worst part was the hypocrisy. These managers smiled and nodded during diversity training. They signed off on corporate policies about equal opportunity. They gave speeches about Kane Galactic Industries being a family that valued all its members. But behind closed doors, they made decisions based on prejudice and fear. They rejected brilliant minds because those minds came in packages they did not like. They denied opportunities to people who reminded them of Marcus himself. People who had climbed from poverty. People who looked different. People who talked differently. Marcus knew he could simply fire the offending managers. Lisa's report gave him all the evidence he needed. But that felt too easy. It would solve the immediate problem, but it would not address the deeper rot. How many other managers were hiding similar biases? How many departments had cultures that quietly excluded talented people? How many brilliant engineers and pilots and scientists had been turned away from his company? Their potential wasted because someone decided they did not fit in. Marcus needed to understand the full scope of the problem. He needed to see it with his own eyes. Reading reports was not enough. He had been too far removed from the ground-level operations of his company. He lived in executive suites and attended board meetings. He gave speeches at conferences and negotiated contracts with planetary governors. When was the last time he had actually met a regular employee? When had he last walked through a hiring center or sat in a break room? He had lost touch with the daily reality of Kane Galactic Industries. That night, Marcus made a decision. He would go undercover in his own company. He would become an ordinary job applicant and experience firsthand what others had experienced. He would see how his managers treated people when they thought no one important was watching. He would learn the truth, no matter how ugly it might be, and then he would fix it. Lisa tried to talk him out of it when he called her to his office the next morning. She argued it was dangerous. What if someone recognized him? What if the media found out? What if it backfired and made the company look worse? Marcus listened patiently to her concerns. Then he told her to start making arrangements. He wanted a complete cover identity. He wanted falsified credentials that would pass any background check. He wanted holographic disguise technology that would make him unrecognizable. And he wanted it done in 1 week. Lisa knew better than to argue when Marcus used that tone. She had worked for him for 8 years. She knew he was stubborn when he believed he was right. And deep down she knew he was right about this. The company had a cancer growing inside it. Surface-level fixes would not cut it out. They needed radical surgery. If Marcus was willing to put himself on the line to save his company and its values, then Lisa would make sure he had everything he needed to succeed. Over the next 7 days, Lisa assembled a team of specialists she trusted absolutely. A makeup artist who had worked in covert operations, a tech expert who could create unbreakable false identities, a holographic engineer who designed disguises for intelligence agents. Together, they transformed Marcus Kane, billionaire CEO, into Marcus Johnson, an ordinary job seeker with solid credentials but nothing special. The holographic overlay changed his facial features subtly, added a few years of age, made him look tired and a bit worn down by life. The kind of person who might get overlooked in a crowd. They created a complete background for Marcus Johnson. Education records showing degrees from decent but not prestigious universities. Work history at small companies that no longer existed or had been absorbed by larger corporations. References that would check out if anyone bothered to call them. Everything was designed to make Marcus Johnson forgettable. Average. Just another applicant in a pool of thousands. On the 8th day, Marcus Kane ceased to exist. In his place stood Marcus Johnson, age 47, recently arrived at Nexus Prime from a failed colony venture in the outer systems. Marcus Johnson needed work. He had bills to pay and a family to support back on Earth. He had good qualifications, but nothing that would make him stand out. He was exactly the kind of person who should have a decent shot at a job with Kane Galactic Industries. Exactly the kind of person who, if Lisa's report was accurate, might find himself rejected for all the wrong reasons. Marcus stood in front of a mirror in a small apartment Lisa had rented for him in the worker levels of Nexus Prime. He barely recognized himself. The expensive suits were gone. He wore plain work clothes bought from a discount store. His hands looked rougher, more calloused. His posture was different, less confident, more uncertain. He looked like a man who had been beaten down by life but still had enough fight left to keep trying. Tomorrow, Marcus Johnson would apply for a job at Kane Galactic Industries. He would walk into the hiring center on Deck 47 and submit his application. He would sit for interviews with the same managers who had been rejecting qualified candidates. He would see firsthand whether the company he built still stood for anything, or if it had become just another corporation, where the powerful decided who deserved a chance and who did not. Marcus took a deep breath and turned away from the mirror. He had built an empire. Now he would see if that empire was worth saving. The hiring center on Deck 47 was nothing like Marcus remembered from his brief tour 5 years ago. Back then it had seemed bright and welcoming, full of promise and opportunity. Now, seeing it through the eyes of Marcus Johnson, it looked cold and impersonal. The waiting area was clean enough, with rows of plastic chairs bolted to the floor. Holographic displays on the walls showed recruitment videos featuring smiling employees of various species, talking about how much they loved working for Kane Galactic Industries. The irony was not lost on Marcus. He arrived at 7 in the morning, an hour before the center opened. Already a line had formed outside the entrance. Marcus counted at least 60 people waiting. Humans, Centaurians, a few Valkyrians, even a Thaxian, which was rare this far from the core systems. All of them clutched datapads with their credentials and references. All of them wore the same expression of nervous hope. Marcus joined the line and waited. The woman in front of him was human, probably in her early 30s. She had the look of someone from the Belt colonies, with the slight build that came from growing up in low gravity. She kept checking her datapad, scrolling through what must have been her application for the 100th time. Marcus noticed her hands were shaking slightly. Behind him, a young Centaurian male shifted his weight from foot to foot. His dual hearts were beating fast enough that Marcus could hear the rhythmic thump even through the ambient noise of the station. When the doors finally opened, the line moved slowly. Everyone had to check in at the front desk, verify their appointment times, and receive a visitor badge. The receptionist was a tired-looking human woman who processed each person with mechanical efficiency. She barely made eye contact. When Marcus reached the desk, she scanned his datapad, printed out his badge, and waved him toward the waiting area without a single word. So much for the warm welcome the recruitment videos promised. Marcus found a seat near the back of the room where he could observe everything. The waiting area filled up quickly. By 8:30, every chair was taken and people were standing along the walls. A large display board showed names and interview room assignments. Every few minutes, a name would appear and someone would hurry off toward the interview corridors. Those who returned did so quietly, their faces giving away nothing. Some looked hopeful. Others looked defeated. None of them spoke to each other. It was as if talking might jinx their chances. Marcus Johnson was scheduled for 3 interviews over 2 days. The first was at 10 in the morning with a department supervisor named Craig Bennett. According to Lisa's research, Bennett ran a small team in the propulsion systems division. He had worked for Kane Galactic Industries for 12 years and had a decent performance record. He also had a troubling pattern in his hiring decisions. Over the past 3 years, Bennett had interviewed 47 candidates. He hired 11 of them. All 11 were human males between the ages of 25 and 40. All of them came from Earth or the inner colonies. Not a single alien, not a single woman, not a single person from the outer systems. When Marcus's name appeared on the board, he made his way to interview room 7. The corridor leading to the rooms was narrow and poorly lit. The doors were unmarked except for numbers. Marcus knocked on the door marked with a 7 and heard a voice tell him to enter. He stepped inside and found himself in a small windowless room with a desk, 2 chairs, and nothing else. Craig Bennett sat behind the desk, scrolling through something on his tablet. He did not look up when Marcus entered. Marcus stood there for a full 30 seconds before Bennett acknowledged his presence. Finally, Bennett glanced up and Marcus saw something flicker across his face. It was quick, gone in an instant, but Marcus caught it. Disappointment, maybe. Or disapproval. Bennett's eyes took in Marcus's appearance in one quick sweep, and Marcus knew in that moment that this interview was already over before it began. Bennett gestured to the empty chair without saying anything. Marcus sat down and waited. Bennett went back to his tablet, making Marcus wait again. It was a power play, obvious and petty. Marcus had seen it before in business negotiations. Make the other person wait. Establish dominance. Show them you are in control. What Bennett did not know was that Marcus had invented half the tactics in the book Bennett was trying to use. Finally, Bennett put down his tablet and looked at Marcus with an expression that could only be described as bored. He did not offer his hand. He did not smile. He simply said, "So, Marcus Johnson, tell me why you want to work here." His tone suggested he did not care about the answer. Marcus launched into the prepared response Lisa had helped him craft. He talked about his passion for propulsion technology. He mentioned his experience with quantum drive systems from his previous positions. He referenced specific projects Kane Galactic Industries was working on and explained how his skills could contribute. It was a good answer, enthusiastic but not desperate, knowledgeable but not arrogant. Bennett barely listened. Instead of following up on anything Marcus said, Bennett interrupted him mid-sentence. "Your resume says you worked at several smaller companies in the outer systems. Why did you leave those positions?" The question was not asked out of curiosity. It was asked as if Bennett already knew the answer and was just waiting to catch Marcus in a lie. Marcus explained that the companies had either gone bankrupt or been absorbed by larger corporations. It was true according to the background Lisa had created. It was also common in the outer systems where businesses struggled against the big players from the inner colonies. Bennett's expression did not change. He made a note on his tablet, and Marcus could not shake the feeling that whatever Bennett was writing had nothing to do with what Marcus had just said. The interview continued in the same vein for another 15 minutes. Bennett asked questions but did not listen to the answers. He glanced at Marcus's credentials on his datapad, but spent more time looking at Marcus himself, as if trying to find something wrong with him. At one point, Bennett suggested that Marcus might be more comfortable applying for positions in maintenance or cargo handling. When Marcus politely pointed out that his engineering degrees qualified him for technical positions, Bennett just shrugged and said something about realistic expectations. Marcus felt anger building in his chest, but he kept his face neutral. This was exactly what Lisa's report had described. Bennett was not evaluating Marcus based on his qualifications. He had made up his mind the moment Marcus walked through the door. Everything else was just going through the motions. Bennett was wasting both their time because he had already decided that Marcus Johnson did not fit his narrow definition of what an engineer should look like. After 20 minutes, Bennett stood up, signaling the interview was over. He did not thank Marcus for coming. He did not tell him when to expect a decision. He simply said, "We'll be in touch," in a tone that clearly meant they would not be in touch. Marcus stood, thanked Bennett for his time, and left the room. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides. Back in the waiting area, Marcus found an empty chair and sat down. He had 2 more interviews scheduled, one this afternoon with a Centaurian engineer named Zara, another tomorrow morning with Peter Collins, the division director. Marcus took deep breaths and tried to calm himself. He could not blow his cover by losing his temper. He needed to see this through. Around him, other applicants continued their nervous waiting. The woman from the Belt Colonies returned from her interview looking close to tears. The young Centaurian never came back to the waiting area at all. Marcus wondered how many of these people were experiencing the same thing he just had. How many qualified candidates were being dismissed by managers who had already decided they did not fit in? How many dreams were being crushed not by lack of ability, but by prejudice and fear? Marcus had built Kane Galactic Industries on the principle that everyone deserved a fair chance. That talent and hard work mattered more than appearance or background. Sitting in this waiting room, watching hope die in the eyes of people who just wanted an opportunity to prove themselves, Marcus realized how badly he had failed. The company he created had been corrupted from within. The values he championed had been abandoned by people who smiled to his face, while betraying everything he stood for behind his back. His second interview was at 2 in the afternoon. Marcus spent the intervening hours in the waiting area, watching and listening. He struck up conversations with other applicants, hearing their stories. A Valkyrian woman told him this was her 5th attempt to get hired at Kane Galactic Industries. She had a doctorate in theoretical physics and had published papers that were used in university courses across 3 systems. Every time she interviewed, she was told she was overqualified or not a good cultural fit. She did not say it directly, but Marcus understood. She was being rejected for being Valkyrian. A human man from the Mars colonies shared his experience. He had top scores in every technical assessment. He had letters of recommendation from professors who were legends in their fields. But his interview had been cut short after 10 minutes. The manager told him they were looking for someone with more practical experience, whatever that meant. The man suspected it was because of his accent. Marcus arrived at the hiring center early again on the second day. His final interview with Peter Collins was scheduled for 9 in the morning. He had spent the previous evening reviewing everything Lisa had compiled on Collins. The man had been with Kane Galactic Industries for 15 years. He started as a junior engineer and worked his way up to division director through a combination of technical skill and political maneuvering. On paper, his record looked good. His division met its targets. His teams delivered projects on time. But the numbers told a different story when you looked closer. Collins ran the largest propulsion systems division. On Nexus Prime, he oversaw 300 employees working on quantum drive, development and testing. In the 5 years since he became director, his division had hired 92 new employees. 87 of them were human. Of those 87, 81 were male. 76 came from Earth or the inner colonies. The pattern was so obvious that Marcus wondered how he had never noticed it before. Then again he realized he had never looked. He had trusted his managers to uphold the values he preached. That trust had been misplaced. While Marcus waited for his name to appear on the board, he noticed something happening in the corner of the waiting area. A group of employees were taking their morning break. They had clustered near the coffee dispensers, talking in voices that were not quite low enough. Marcus moved closer, pretending to check the job postings on a nearby display. He activated the recording function on his datapad, concealing it in his palm. One of the men was Craig Bennett, the supervisor who had interviewed Marcus the previous day. He was talking to two other managers Marcus did not recognize. They were laughing about something. As Marcus got closer, he caught fragments of their conversation. Bennett was telling a story about an interview he had just finished. He described the candidate in mocking terms, imitating their accent and making jokes about their appearance. The other managers laughed. Then another voice joined the conversation. Marcus recognized it immediately. Peter Collins had walked up to the group carrying a cup of coffee. Collins was tall and broad-shouldered, with graying hair and a face that probably looked distinguished in board meetings. Right now he looked like someone enjoying gossip with his friends. He asked Bennett if he had made his decision on the candidate. Bennett said he would be rejecting them. Too risky, he said. Not the right fit for the team culture. Collins nodded approvingly. He said something about maintaining standards, about not lowering the bar just to fill quotas. The other managers murmured agreement. Then Collins said something that made Marcus's blood boil. He said that Kane Galactic Industries had gotten too soft on diversity, that the CEO was too focused on making everyone happy instead of building the best teams, that real excellence required selectivity. The other managers nodded like Collins had said something profound, instead of something that betrayed everything the company supposedly stood for. Marcus's datapad captured every word. He stood there, invisible in plain sight, listening to his own managers mock the values he had built his empire on. They spoke with such casual confidence, so certain that they were right and everyone else was wrong. They believed they were protecting excellence when they were really just protecting their own narrow worldview. They thought they were being selective when they were simply being prejudiced. The conversation shifted to specific candidates they had rejected recently. A Valkyrian with advanced degrees in quantum mechanics, turned down because Collins thought aliens got too emotional under pressure. A woman from Earth with perfect test scores, rejected because Bennett said his team worked better with male engineers. A human from the outer colonies with 10 years of experience, dismissed because someone thought he looked unreliable. Every rejection had a reason that sounded professional on the surface, but was really just an excuse to exclude people who were different. Then someone mentioned the name Marcus Johnson. Bennett laughed and said that was his 9 o'clock interview with Collins. He told Collins not to waste too much time on it, said the candidate looked desperate and probably had exaggerated his credentials. Collins said he would keep it short. He had real work to do and could not spend all morning babysitting applicants who were not serious contenders. The men all laughed again and headed back to their offices. Marcus stood there for a long moment after they left. His hands were shaking with barely controlled rage. He wanted to tear off his disguise right then and there. He wanted to confront Collins and Bennett and every other manager who had betrayed his trust. But he forced himself to stay calm. He had come this far. He needed to finish the investigation. He needed to experience the full extent of what these managers were doing. Only then could he truly understand the scope of the problem and fix it permanently. When his name appeared on the board, Marcus made his way to interview room 3. He knocked and entered. Peter Collins sat behind a desk that was larger than the one in Bennett's room. The office had a window looking out at the station's interior, marking it as a space reserved for senior staff. Collins did not stand when Marcus entered. He gestured to a chair while finishing something on his tablet. Marcus sat and waited. Finally, Collins looked up. His eyes swept over Marcus with the same dismissive assessment Bennett had used. Marcus could almost see the man's brain categorizing and dismissing him in that single glance. Collins did not offer to shake hands. He simply said, "Marcus Johnson, let us make this quick. I have a busy schedule." Not even a pretense of courtesy. Collins asked exactly 3 questions over the next 10 minutes. None of them were about Marcus's qualifications or experience. Instead, Collins asked where Marcus had gone to school. When Marcus named a university that was not one of the prestigious inner colony institutions, Collins made a note and his expression said everything. He asked how Marcus had heard about the opening. Marcus said through the general job board. Collins made another note and Marcus knew that was being counted against him too. Real candidates, Collins clearly believed, came through personal referrals and elite networks. The third question was about why Marcus had left his previous positions. Marcus explained again about company closures and consolidations in the outer systems. Collins interrupted before he finished. He said something about people who bounced between jobs usually having performance issues. Marcus tried to respond, but Collins held up a hand. He said they were looking for someone with more stable experience, someone who had proven themselves at major corporations, someone who fit their culture. Marcus felt something snap inside him. He had built this company from nothing. He had created opportunities for thousands of people. He had proven that talent came from everywhere, not just the elite institutions and prominent families. And now this man, who worked for him, who drew a salary that Marcus ultimately paid, was sitting there telling him he was not good enough, that he did not fit, that he was not the right kind of person for Kane Galactic Industries. But Marcus kept his face neutral. He thanked Collins for his time. He stood and shook the man's hand even though Collins barely made the effort. He walked out of that office with his head held high, even though he knew Collins was already dismissing him from memory. Marcus returned to the waiting area one last time. He sat down and pretended to check his datapad while his mind raced. He had what he needed now. 3 interviews that proved the pattern, recorded conversations showing the attitudes that drove the discrimination. A clear picture of how his company had been corrupted from within. But Marcus decided to push further. He would apply to other divisions. He would see if this rot extended beyond the propulsion systems department. He needed to know exactly how deep the cancer went before he cut it out. Over the next 5 days, Marcus applied to 6 more positions in different departments across Kane Galactic Industries. He interviewed with 9 more managers. Some of them were like Zara, genuinely trying to evaluate candidates fairly within a broken system, but most were like Bennett and Collins. They had decided who they wanted before the interviews even started. Qualified candidates who did not match their preconceptions were dismissed with vague excuses and coded language. Marcus documented everything. He recorded conversations. He collected rejection notices. He gathered data on hiring patterns across multiple divisions. He spoke with dozens of other rejected applicants, hearing their stories and confirming that his experience was not unique. The picture that emerged was damning. Kane Galactic Industries, the company he had built on principles of fairness and opportunity, had become just another place where the powerful protected their privilege and the talented were turned away for being different. But Marcus also found hope. He discovered managers who were fighting against the tide. People like Zara who tried to hire fairly despite pressure from above. He found employees who spoke out against discrimination even though it hurt their careers. He learned about informal networks of workers who helped each other navigate the hostile culture. These people proved that the company's values had not been completely lost. They had just been suppressed by those in power. On the 6th day, Marcus received his final rejection notice. It came from Collins's office. The conference room on Deck 47 could hold 50 people comfortably. Lisa Torres had arranged for everyone Marcus requested to be there at 9 in the morning. She told them it was an emergency meeting about hiring procedures. She did not mention who called the meeting or why it was truly necessary. Marcus wanted the element of surprise. He wanted these managers to walk in expecting a routine discussion about policy updates. What they would get instead was a reckoning. Marcus arrived early and took a seat in the back corner of the room. He was still wearing his Marcus Johnson disguise. People filed in slowly, talking among themselves. Craig Bennett came in with a cup of coffee, laughing at something someone had said. Peter Collins arrived exactly on time, carrying his tablet and looking annoyed at having his morning disrupted. Others followed. Managers from propulsion systems, life support, communications, and cargo operations. 43 people in total, representing every division that operated out of Deck 47. None of them paid any attention to Marcus sitting in the corner. He was just another face in the crowd. Maybe an assistant or junior staffer who had been told to attend. His disguise was perfect. Even people who had interviewed him days earlier did not give him a second glance. They were too busy checking their tablets or complaining about the interruption to their schedules. These were important people with important work to do. They did not have time for mandatory meetings about hiring procedures they had no intention of following anyway. At exactly 9 o'clock, Lisa Torres entered through the main doors. Behind her came 3 senior executives from corporate headquarters: the Vice President of Human Resources, the Chief Legal Counsel, the Head of Corporate Ethics and Compliance. Their presence caused a ripple of confusion through the room. This was not a routine policy meeting. Something serious was happening. Managers straightened in their chairs. Side conversations died away. Everyone turned their attention to the front of the room where Lisa was setting up a holographic display. Lisa did not waste time with pleasantries. She activated the display and the room went dark except for the glowing projection. She said simply that they were there to review evidence of systematic discrimination in hiring practices. The room erupted in protests. Several managers started talking at once. Collins stood up and demanded to know who had made such accusations. Bennett looked around nervously. Others exchanged worried glances. Lisa held up her hand for silence. The first slide appeared on the display. It showed hiring statistics for the propulsion systems division over the past 5 years. The numbers were broken down by species, gender, and origin. The pattern was undeniable. 87 humans out of 92 hires, 81 males, 76 from Earth or inner colonies. The room went quiet as people processed what they were seeing. Some looked confused, others looked guilty. Collins crossed his arms and said the numbers reflected the quality of the applicant pool. That was not discrimination. That was just hiring the best candidates. Lisa clicked to the next slide. This one showed the qualifications of candidates who had been rejected during the same period. Advanced degrees from prestigious universities. Years of experience with leading companies. Published research papers, patents, awards, and commendations. All rejected. Lisa let the slide speak for itself. Then she clicked again. This time the display showed video footage. The break room conversation Marcus had recorded. Bennett and Collins talking about maintaining standards and not lowering the bar. Joking about rejected candidates. Speaking with casual confidence about keeping their teams homogeneous. The room exploded. People started shouting. Some tried to defend themselves. Others demanded to know who had recorded private conversations. Collins pointed at Lisa and accused her of conducting an illegal investigation. Bennett stood up and said this was entrapment. The chief legal counsel spoke for the first time. Her voice cut through the chaos like a knife. She said that company policy allowed for investigation of discrimination complaints, that employees had no expectation of privacy in common areas, that everything shown so far was admissible as evidence. Lisa continued the presentation. More recordings played. More data appeared. Interview notes that used coded language to justify rejecting qualified candidates. Email chains where managers discussed strategies for avoiding diversity hires. Testimony from employees who had witnessed or experienced discrimination. The evidence was overwhelming. It painted a picture of systematic, intentional exclusion of people who did not fit a narrow mold. This was not unconscious bias or accidental oversight. This was deliberate policy enforced from the top down. Halfway through the presentation, Marcus stood up. He walked slowly toward the front of the room. People noticed him moving and conversations faltered. He reached the display and turned to face the assembled managers. Then he deactivated his holographic disguise. The transformation was instantaneous. Marcus Johnson disappeared. Marcus Kane stood in his place. The room went absolutely silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the metal floor. Several people gasped. Bennett's face went white. Collins sat down heavily, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Others looked around in confusion, not understanding what was happening. Marcus let the silence stretch for a long moment. Then he spoke. His voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the room. He said he was Marcus Johnson. The applicant Bennett had dismissed without a real interview. The candidate Collins had judged unworthy in 10 minutes. The engineer who had been rejected by 9 different managers across 6 divisions. Marcus told them he had gone undercover in his own company. He had applied for jobs he was overqualified for. He had sat in waiting rooms with dozens of other hopeful applicants. He had experienced firsthand what it felt like to be judged not on his abilities, but on factors that should have been irrelevant. He had heard his qualifications dismissed, his credentials questioned, his character doubted, All because he did not look like what these managers thought an engineer should look like. The room remained silent. Some managers stared at the floor. Others looked at Marcus with expressions ranging from shame to defiance. Collins finally found his voice. He said Marcus had tricked them, that this was not fair, that he could not judge them based on deception. Marcus looked at him with eyes that had seen too much. He said Collins had judged hundreds of candidates based on nothing more than their appearance, that he had rejected qualified people because they did not match his narrow worldview, that he had betrayed the trust placed in him and the values the company was built on. Marcus began to speak about humanity's journey. He talked about how humans had once been divided by trivial differences, how they had waged wars over skin color and religion and national borders, how they had oppressed and enslaved each other over perceived superiority. He reminded them that humanity had nearly destroyed itself before learning that diversity was strength, not weakness. That cooperation was more powerful than division, that judging people by their character and abilities rather than their appearance was not just morally right but practically necessary. He spoke about humanity's entry into the galactic community, how other species had been skeptical of humans at first, how humans had to prove they had truly evolved beyond their primitive prejudices, how they had earned respect by treating all beings fairly, regardless of what they looked like or where they came from. Marcus said that Kane Galactic Industries had been a symbol of this evolution, a proof that humans could build something great by embracing everyone who had talent and drive. Then his voice hardened. He said that some people in this room had forgotten those lessons, that they had taken the trust he placed in them and used it to perpetuate the same old hatreds their ancestors had supposedly left behind, that they had rejected brilliant minds because those minds came in packages they did not approve of, that they had denied opportunities to people who reminded them of Marcus himself. People who had climbed from poverty, people who looked different, people who talked differently. Marcus told them about the Valkyrian mathematician he had met, the woman with a doctorate who had been rejected 5 times because managers thought aliens were too emotional. He talked about the human from Mars with perfect test scores who had been dismissed because of his accent, the Centaurian pilot with combat experience who had been judged before he sat down, the dozens of other qualified candidates who had been turned away not because they lacked ability but because they lacked the right pedigree or appearance or background. Every story added weight to the silence in the room. Some managers were crying now. Others sat frozen. A few still looked defiant, unwilling to admit they had done anything wrong. Marcus looked at each of them in turn. He said he had built this company from nothing, that he had created opportunities for thousands of people, that he had proven that talent came from everywhere, and that he would not allow his life's work to be corrupted by people who valued conformity over excellence. Then Marcus said the words everyone in the room had been dreading. He said that effective immediately, several managers would be terminated from Kane Galactic Industries. Their employment contracts were void. Their access to company systems was revoked. Security would escort them from the premises within the hour. The termination sent shockwaves through Kane Galactic Industries. Word spread fast across Nexus Prime Station. 15 managers fired in a single day. The CEO himself had gone undercover to expose discrimination. People who thought they were untouchable had been removed within hours. The story was too dramatic to keep quiet. By noon, everyone on the station knew what had happened. By evening, news had reached the other facilities across the 12 systems. Marcus spent the rest of that first day in meetings. He spoke with the heads of every major division. He told them what he had discovered and what would change. Some were shocked. A few had suspected problems but had not known how deep they ran. Others admitted they had seen troubling signs but had not known how to address them. Everyone understood that this was not just about fixing one department. This was about transforming the entire company culture. Lisa Torres worked with the legal team to ensure everything was documented properly. The 15 terminated managers had signed employment contracts that included clauses about discrimination. They had violated those contracts repeatedly. The evidence was overwhelming. Still, Lisa expected lawsuits. She expected angry accusations. She expected some of the fired managers to go to the media with distorted versions of events. She prepared defensive strategies for all of it, but Marcus was more concerned with the people who had been hurt by the discrimination. He had Lisa compile a list of every candidate who had been rejected over the past 5 years, from the divisions where problems were found. The list was longer than he expected. Over 300 names, 300 qualified people who had been denied opportunities they deserved. 300 lives affected by the prejudices of managers who should have known better. Marcus insisted on reviewing every file personally. He spent 3 days going through applications and interview notes. He read the qualifications of people who had been dismissed with barely a glance. He saw the patterns repeated over and over. Exceptional candidates rejected for being the wrong species. Brilliant engineers turned away for coming from the wrong colonies. Experienced professionals dismissed because they did not attend elite universities. Each rejection was a missed opportunity for the company and a stolen chance for the individual. The Valkyrian mathematician was on the list. Her name was Dr. Calavorn. She had been rejected 5 times over 3 years. Each time, the rejection notice cited vague concerns about cultural fit. Each time, the real reason was that the hiring manager did not want aliens on their team. Marcus looked at her credentials and felt anger rise in his chest again. She had published 17 papers on quantum field theory. She had won awards from 3 different academic institutions. Any company in the galaxy would be lucky to have her. Kane Galactic Industries had turned her away 5 times. Marcus had Lisa send personal messages to every person on the list. The messages came from his private account. They apologized for the discrimination they had experienced. They explained what had been discovered and what was being done to fix it. They offered each person the chance to reapply with a guarantee of fair evaluation. Marcus knew that many would not respond. Why would they trust a company that had rejected them? But he had to try. He owed them that much at minimum. The responses started coming in within hours. Some people wrote back with anger. They told Marcus exactly what they thought of Kane Galactic Industries and its empty promises. He read every angry message and felt the weight of their justified rage. Others were more measured. They said they appreciated the apology but had moved on with their lives. A few asked for more information. They wanted to know if this was real or just public relations damage control. Marcus responded to as many as he could, trying to prove his sincerity. Dr. Kayla Vorn was one of the first to respond positively. She wrote a careful message saying she would consider reapplying if the company could prove it had truly changed. She had been hurt too many times to simply accept promises. Marcus wrote back immediately. He told her she could name her terms. She could interview with managers of her choosing. She could speak with current employees. She could tour facilities and see for herself what changes were being made. He would make himself personally available to answer any questions, whatever it took to earn back her trust. The human from Mars, a young engineer named Carlos Rivera, responded with cautious interest. He said he had found work elsewhere but was not happy with it. He had dreamed of working for Kane Galactic Industries since he was a child. The rejection had broken something in him. But if things had really changed, he might be willing to give it another chance. Marcus arranged for Carlos to visit Nexus Prime at company expense. He would see the changes firsthand and decide for himself. Over the next 2 weeks, 47 people from the list agreed to reapply or visit the company. Marcus made sure each one was treated with the respect they should have received originally. He assigned Lisa to personally oversee their interview processes. He told every remaining manager that these candidates were his priority, that they represented the company's commitment to fixing its mistakes, that anyone who mistreated them would join the 15 who had already been fired. But firing bad managers was only the first step. Marcus knew he needed systematic changes to prevent this from happening again. He assembled a task force to redesign the entire hiring process. The task force included human resources professionals, legal experts, and most importantly, employees from diverse backgrounds who could provide perspective on what needed to change. They met daily for 3 weeks, working through every aspect of recruitment and hiring. The first major change was anonymous application screening. All initial reviews would be done with identifying information removed. No names, no photos, no indication of species, gender, or origin. Applications would be judged purely on qualifications and experience. Only candidates who passed the initial screening would move forward to interviews. This would eliminate the unconscious bias that caused many qualified people to be rejected before anyone even looked at their credentials. The second change was diverse interview panels. No single manager would make hiring decisions alone. Every candidate would be interviewed by at least 3 people from different backgrounds. The panel would include at least one person from outside the hiring department to provide fresh perspective. Decisions would require consensus. This would prevent individual biases from determining outcomes. It would also create accountability since multiple people would be responsible for each hire. Third was regular auditing. An independent team would review hiring data quarterly. They would look for patterns that suggested discrimination. Departments where certain groups were consistently rejected would be flagged for investigation. Managers who showed concerning patterns would be required to undergo additional training or face consequences. The audits would be thorough and public. Everyone would know the company was serious about enforcement. Marcus also mandated new training programs. Every employee would go through comprehensive education on unconscious bias, inclusive workplace practices, and the value of diversity. But this would not be the usual boring corporate training that people slept through. Marcus hired actual experts, psychologists who studied discrimination, sociologists who understood systemic prejudice, former victims who could speak to the real impact of bias. The training would be difficult and uncomfortable. It needed to be. Comfortable people did not change. The changes extended beyond hiring. Marcus established clear reporting procedures for discrimination. Employees who experienced or witnessed bias could report it without fear of retaliation. An independent office would investigate every complaint. The office would report directly to Marcus, bypassing department heads who might try to protect their people. Confirmed cases of discrimination would result in immediate termination. No exceptions. No second chances. The policy was harsh but necessary. Marcus also changed how promotions worked. Too often people got promoted because they were friends with the right managers or came from the right backgrounds. Now promotions would be based on clear criteria, performance metrics, skills assessments, peer reviews. Every promotion decision would be documented and justified. Anyone passed over could request an explanation. The process would be transparent and fair. Some employees embraced the changes immediately. They had been waiting for leadership to address problems they had witnessed. Others resisted. They complained that the new policies were too strict, that they made hiring too complicated, that they punished people for honest mistakes. Marcus was unsympathetic to these complaints. He said that treating all people fairly should not be complicated, that there was no such thing as an honest mistake when it came to discrimination, that anyone who found basic fairness too difficult should find another job. 3 more managers resigned in the first month after the changes were announced. They said they could not work under the new restrictions. Marcus let them go without argument. He knew they were people who wanted to preserve the old ways, people who benefited from a system that valued connections over competence. The company was better off without them. Their departures created opportunities for people who actually believed in merit and fairness. 3 months after the mass terminations, Kane Galactic Industries held its first company-wide conference under the new policies. Marcus insisted that every facility across the 12 systems participate. Some attended in person at the main auditorium on Nexus Prime. Others joined through holographic projection from distant stations and planetary outposts. Over 40,000 employees gathered virtually in one space. It was the largest meeting in company history. Marcus stood on the stage and looked out at the assembled faces. Humans, Centaurians, Valkyrians, Thaxians, and dozens of other species, young and old, male and female, and those who identified as neither. People from Earth and Mars and the asteroid colonies and worlds whose names he still struggled to pronounce. This was what he had always envisioned. This was what Kane Galactic Industries was supposed to be, a place where anyone with talent and drive could succeed. He began by acknowledging the difficulty of the past 3 months. The terminations had been necessary but painful. The new policies had created challenges and frustrations. Change was never easy, especially change that forced people to examine their own biases and assumptions. But Marcus said he was proud of how most employees had responded. They had embraced the reforms. They had worked to understand why the changes were needed. They had proven that the company's values were more than just words on a mission statement. Then Marcus introduced some of the newly hired employees. Dr. Kellivorn spoke about her research into quantum field applications. She explained how her work could reduce faster than light travel time by 15%. The implications were enormous. Faster ships meant more efficient trade. better communication between distant colonies, enhanced defensive capabilities for frontier stations. Her research had been rejected 5 times because hiring managers did not want aliens on their teams. Now she was revolutionizing the company's core technology. Carlos Rivera presented his work on power distribution systems. He had identified inefficiencies that no one else had noticed. His solutions would save the company millions of credits annually while improving performance. He demonstrated prototypes that drew applause from the engineering divisions. This was the young man who had been rejected because of his accent. Because he came from Mars instead of Earth. Because someone decided he did not fit their narrow idea of what an engineer should be. A Centaurian pilot named Vex spoke about the new training programs he was developing. He had combat experience from the frontier wars. He understood ship handling in ways that civilian pilots never could. His methods would make Kane Galactic Industries pilots the best in the sector. He had been turned away originally because the hiring manager thought Centaurians were too aggressive. Now he was transforming an entire division. Each presentation demonstrated the same truth. Talent came from everywhere. Innovation did not care about species or origin or appearance. The people who had been rejected were not inferior. They were exceptional. The managers who rejected them had not been protecting standards. They had been enforcing prejudice. And that prejudice had cost the company dearly in lost opportunities and wasted potential. Marcus then shared the results of the first quarterly audit under the new system. The numbers were dramatic. Hiring had increased across all demographics. Applications from previously underrepresented groups had doubled because word spread that Kane Galactic Industries was serious about change. The quality of new hires had improved because managers were evaluating candidates based on merit rather than bias. Employee satisfaction scores were up. Productivity was rising. The reforms were working. But Marcus also acknowledged ongoing challenges. A few departments still showed concerning patterns. Some managers were following the letter of the new policies while violating their spirit. Anonymous complaints revealed pockets of resistance where the old culture persisted. Marcus said these problems would be addressed. The quarterly audits would continue. Problem areas would be investigated. Managers who refused to change would be replaced. The company's commitment to fairness was not negotiable. Then Marcus did something unexpected. He invited questions from employees. Not pre-screened questions. Not softballs lobbed by corporate communications. Real questions from anyone who wanted to ask. The auditorium went quiet. People looked at each other uncertainly. CEOs did not usually open themselves up like this, but Marcus waited patiently. Finally, someone raised their hand. The question came from a human woman who worked in communications. She asked how the company would handle managers who claimed they were just maintaining standards when they rejected diverse candidates. It was a good question, Marcus answered honestly. He said the new audit system would identify suspicious patterns, that managers would need to document their reasoning for rejections, that claims about standards would be tested against actual performance data. If someone consistently rejected qualified diverse candidates while hiring less qualified candidates who fit a narrow profile, that pattern would speak for itself. Another question came from a Valkyrian engineer. He asked whether the reforms would lead to lowered standards or quotas. Marcus smiled. He said that was exactly the kind of question the fired managers would ask. He explained that the reforms raised standards by expanding the pool of talent, that quotas were unnecessary when you evaluated people fairly, that the best candidates often came from unexpected places when you actually looked for them. The goal was not to hire people because of their background. The goal was to stop excluding people because of their background. A young human man asked what would happen to employees who made honest mistakes, who accidentally said something offensive without meaning harm. Marcus acknowledged this was complicated. He said the company would distinguish between ignorance and malice. Someone who made an honest mistake and learned from it would be treated differently than someone who repeatedly showed discriminatory behavior. The key was willingness to change. People who genuinely wanted to do better would be supported. People who refused to change would not last long. The questions continued for over an hour. Marcus answered each one directly. He did not hide behind corporate language or vague promises. When he did not know something, he said so and promised to find out. When someone challenged him, he engaged rather than deflecting. The employees saw that this was real. Their CEO was personally invested in making these changes work. He was not delegating the hard work to human resources. He was leading from the front. Near the end of the question period, an older human man stood up. He said he had worked for Kane Galactic Industries for 20 years. He admitted he had not always treated everyone fairly. He had made assumptions based on appearance. He had favored people who reminded him of himself. But the past 3 months had forced him to examine his behavior. He had gone through the new training. He had listened to the stories of people who had been hurt by discrimination. He said he was ashamed of his past actions but grateful for the chance to do better. The auditorium was silent. Then someone started clapping. Others joined in. Soon everyone was applauding, not because the man had discriminated, but because he had the courage to admit it and commit to change. That was what Marcus wanted to see. Not perfect people who never made mistakes, but honest people willing to acknowledge their flaws and work to improve. That kind of honesty and growth was how real change happened. Marcus closed the conference by telling a story. He talked about his own childhood in the slums of New Chicago, how people had written him off because of where he came from, how he had been told repeatedly that someone like him could not succeed, how he had proven them wrong through sheer determination, and the few people who gave him chances. He said Kane Galactic Industries existed because someone had looked past his background and seen his potential. The company owed its success to that principle, to the idea that talent deserved opportunity regardless of packaging. He said humanity had learned hard lessons throughout its history. Lessons about the cost of prejudice and the value of diversity. Those lessons had enabled humans to unite their own world and then reach out to the stars. Other species had welcomed humanity into the galactic community because humans proved they could treat all beings fairly. Kane Galactic Industries had been a symbol of that progress. The recent scandal had tarnished that symbol, but the company would rebuild it stronger than before. Marcus ended with a challenge. He told every employee that they were responsible for the company culture, that policies and audits could only do so much. Real change required everyone to examine their own biases, to speak up when they witnessed discrimination, to give chances to people who might seem different or unusual, to remember that the most talented person for a job might not look or sound like what they expected. He said the company's future depended on whether they could live up to the values they claimed to believe. The conference ended with a standing ovation. Marcus left the stage exhausted but hopeful. The reforms were taking hold. The company was changing, but he knew this was just the beginning. Changing a culture took years. There would be setbacks. There would be people who resisted. There would be times when progress seemed impossible. But Marcus was committed for the long term. He had built this company once. Now he would rebuild it properly. 6 months had passed since Marcus went undercover in his own company. Kane Galactic Industries had transformed in ways that exceeded even his hopes. The quarterly audits showed continued improvement in hiring diversity. Employee satisfaction reached record highs. Productivity increased across every division. Most importantly, the culture had shifted. People felt safe reporting discrimination. Managers understood they would be held accountable. The company lived its values instead of just proclaiming them, but the story was far from over. Other companies throughout the 12 systems took notice of what Kane Galactic Industries had accomplished. Some reached out asking for guidance. Corporate executives who had once dismissed diversity as political correctness now saw it as a competitive advantage. They wanted to know how Marcus had implemented the reforms. What worked? What did not? How to overcome resistance. Marcus was happy to share everything. He believed that raising standards across the entire industry would benefit everyone. Marcus worked with his team to create a comprehensive guide documenting the entire transformation process. The guide included the original audit data that revealed the discrimination, the evidence gathered during his undercover investigation, the specific policies implemented to address the problems, the training programs developed to change attitudes, the audit systems designed to maintain accountability. Everything was laid out in detail so other companies could follow the same path. He made the guide available for free to any company that requested it. Within weeks, dozens of organizations downloaded the materials. Some were competitors who had previously tried to poach his employees. Marcus did not care. This was bigger than business rivalry. This was about creating an economy where talent mattered more than appearance, where opportunity was determined by ability rather than background. If his competitors became more fair and effective, the entire galaxy would benefit. Universities began incorporating the case into their curricula. Business students studied how Marcus identified the problem and implemented solutions. Ethics classes debated whether going undercover was appropriate. Leadership courses examined how he balanced justice with mercy. The story became a teaching tool used across dozens of institutions. Future generations of managers would learn from what happened at Kane Galactic Industries. They would understand the costs of discrimination and the value of fairness. The Galactic Commerce Council, which oversaw trade and business practices across the major civilizations, invited Marcus to speak at their annual conference. Representatives from hundreds of worlds attended. Marcus stood before them and told his story. He did not sugarcoat anything. He admitted he had been blind to problems in his own company. He acknowledged that good intentions were not enough without vigilant oversight. He described the pain of discovering that people he trusted had betrayed the company's values. Then he spoke about humanity's unique position in the galaxy. Humans were relative newcomers to interstellar civilization. Other species had been traveling between stars for thousands of years before Earth developed faster than light technology. But humans brought something different to the galactic community. They brought hard-won wisdom about the dangers of prejudice. They had nearly destroyed themselves through discrimination and division. They learned that diversity was not just morally right, but practically necessary for survival and progress. Marcus said that humanity's greatest contribution to galactic civilization was not technology or military strength. It was the principle that all beings deserved equal opportunity, regardless of their appearance or origin. This principle had enabled humans to unite their own fractured world. It allowed them to reach out to other species without trying to dominate or exploit. It made humans trusted partners in trade and diplomacy. But that trust was fragile. Every time a human company discriminated, it damaged humanity's reputation. Every time a human leader chose prejudice over principle, it raised doubts about whether humans had truly evolved. The speech received a standing ovation. Several representatives approached Marcus afterward to discuss implementing similar reforms in their own systems. A Centaurian trade minister said humans had taught the galaxy important lessons about overcoming internal divisions. A Valkyrian educator thanked Marcus for providing a model that could be adapted to address discrimination in non-human societies. The message was clear. What happened at Kane Galactic Industries mattered beyond one company or even one species. It represented a universal struggle against prejudice. But not everyone celebrated the changes. Some business leaders criticized Marcus publicly. They said he had overreacted to minor problems, that he had destroyed careers over political correctness, that his reforms would make companies less efficient by prioritizing diversity over competence. These critics argued that managers should have freedom to hire whoever they wanted. That forced equality would lead to lowered standards and reduced productivity. Marcus responded to these criticisms in an open letter published across major news networks. He pointed out that his reforms had increased both productivity and profitability, that the previously rejected candidates who were now thriving proved that discrimination had been excluding competent people, not protecting standards, that giving managers unlimited freedom to hire had resulted in systematic bias against qualified candidates. He challenged critics to examine their own hiring data. He suspected they would find the same patterns that had infected Kane Galactic Industries. Some companies took up that challenge. They audited their own practices and discovered troubling patterns. A few implemented reforms similar to what Marcus had done. Others doubled down on their existing approaches, insisting their practices were fine. Marcus noted which companies fell into which category. Kane Galactic Industries would not do business with organizations that openly embraced discrimination. There were enough ethical companies to partner with. The others could fail on their own. Meanwhile, the individuals who had been hired under the new system continued to exceed expectations. Dr. Calivorn published breakthrough research that caught the attention of the scientific community across multiple systems. Her work on quantum field manipulation opened possibilities that had seemed purely theoretical. She was offered positions at prestigious research institutions, but chose to stay with Kane Galactic Industries. She said the company had given her a chance when others rejected her. She would repay that faith by doing her best work. Carlos Rivera became head of his department within 8 months. His innovations in power systems had saved so much money and improved performance so dramatically that he earned rapid promotion. He assembled a diverse team that continued pushing boundaries. His success story was featured in engineering journals and business publications. He became a symbol of what was possible when talent was recognized rather than dismissed based on irrelevant factors. Vex, the Centaurian pilot who had been rejected for being too aggressive, transformed flight training across the company. His methods reduced accidents while improving response times. Military contractors started hiring Kane Galactic Industries pilots specifically because of their training. Vex was promoted to director of all flight operations. He used his authority to ensure that pilot selection was based purely on skill. He knew firsthand the pain of being rejected for the wrong reasons. No one under his command would experience that. These success stories were not isolated incidents. Dozens of previously rejected candidates thrived in their new roles. They brought perspectives and skills that enriched the company in countless ways. They proved over and over that the old hiring practices had been wasting talent. Every innovation they produced was something the company would have missed if Marcus had not investigated and reformed the system. The business case for fairness was overwhelming. Marcus also made changes to executive compensation. Performance bonuses for senior managers now included diversity metrics. Leaders who built inclusive teams and maintained fair hiring practices earned larger bonuses. Those who showed concerning patterns in their departments faced financial consequences. This aligned personal interest with company values. It made fairness profitable for everyone, not just morally right. The company expanded into 3 new systems during this period. Each expansion provided opportunities to implement the reformed practices from the beginning. New facilities were built with diverse hiring panels from day one. Local managers received comprehensive training before they started. The company established partnerships with educational institutions on multiple worlds to create pipelines for talented candidates from all backgrounds. Kane Galactic Industries was not just fixing past mistakes, it was building a better future. Marcus personally reviewed applications for senior leadership positions. He wanted to ensure that people promoted to power truly believed in the company's values. He looked for leaders who had demonstrated commitment to fairness, who had built diverse teams, who had spoken up against discrimination, who understood that excellence and diversity were not opposing forces but complementary strengths. The leadership team he assembled reflected the galaxy's diversity. 1 year after the mass terminations, Kane Galactic Industries held another company-wide conference. Marcus began by acknowledging how far they had come. 2 years had passed since Marcus Kane went undercover in his own company. The transformation of Kane Galactic Industries was complete enough that it had become the new normal. Younger employees who joined after the reforms could barely imagine how things used to be. They heard stories about the old hiring practices and were shocked that such discrimination had existed. The company they knew was one where everyone had a fair chance, where talent was recognized, where diversity was strength rather than something to be feared. Marcus spent much of his time now working on broader issues. He had accepted a position on the Galactic Commerce Council as an advisor on employment practices. He worked with governments across multiple systems to establish standards that would prevent the kind of discrimination he had discovered in his own company. Some planets were eager for guidance. Others resisted, claiming that employment practices were internal matters. Marcus was patient but persistent. He knew that changing entire civilizations took time. The story of his undercover investigation had become legendary. It was taught in schools as an example of ethical leadership. It was referenced in legal proceedings about discrimination. It was cited in business journals as proof that diversity improved performance. The story had taken on a life beyond the facts. Some versions portrayed Marcus as a hero who single-handedly defeated prejudice. He always corrected those accounts when he heard them. He said the real heroes were the people who had been rejected but kept trying, who maintained their dignity in the face of discrimination, who believed they deserved better and refused to accept less. Dr. Keela Vorn had become one of the most prominent scientists in her field. Her research into quantum field manipulation had led to breakthroughs that were transforming space travel. Ships using her innovations could travel 30% faster than previous models. The military implications alone were significant, but the economic impact was revolutionary. Faster ships meant more efficient trade, better communication, quicker response to emergencies. She had accomplished in 2 years what many scientists did not achieve in lifetimes, all because someone finally gave her a chance. Keela often spoke publicly about her experience. She described the pain of being rejected 5 times by Kane Galactic Industries, how each rejection had made her doubt herself despite her qualifications, how she had almost given up on her dreams. Then she talked about the message she received from Marcus offering a real opportunity, how the fair evaluation process had restored her faith, how the supportive environment had enabled her best work. She said she owed her success to the reforms. Without them, she would still be struggling for recognition. Carlos Rivera had become a symbol of success for young people from the outer colonies. He grew up poor on Mars with few advantages. He worked his way through school while supporting his family. He earned top grades and built an impressive resume. Then he was rejected by his dream company because someone did not like his accent, but he persevered. When given a second chance, he proved his worth beyond any doubt. Now he ran an entire division and was being considered for vice president positions. His story inspired thousands of young people who faced similar barriers. Carlos established a foundation to help students from disadvantaged backgrounds. The foundation provided scholarships, mentorship, and career guidance. It partnered with Kane Galactic Industries and other companies to create internship programs. Carlos said he remembered what it felt like to be dismissed because of irrelevant factors. He wanted to ensure that talented young people got opportunities based on their abilities. The foundation helped hundreds of students in its first year alone. Vex, the Centaurian pilot, had revolutionized flight operations across the company and beyond. His training methods were adopted by military academies on multiple worlds. His safety protocols became industry standards. He built a team of pilots from dozens of species who were considered the best in the sector. Vex said the discrimination he faced had taught him empathy. He knew what it felt like to be judged before proving yourself. He made sure no one under his command experienced that. His department had perfect marks in every diversity audit. The 3 of them, Kayla, Carlos, and Vex, represented the human cost of discrimination and the value of reform. They were not abstract statistics. They were real people with families and dreams. They had nearly had those dreams crushed by managers who valued conformity over competence. But they got second chances and proved what was possible when talent was recognized. Their success was the best argument for why the reforms mattered. Meanwhile, the managers who had been fired struggled in obscurity. Peter Collins never recovered his career. He worked a series of minor jobs, always bitter about what he saw as unfair treatment. He never admitted that his discriminatory practices were wrong. He died 5 years later, largely forgotten except as a cautionary tale in business ethics courses. Craig Bennett eventually found steady work, but at a fraction of his previous status and salary. He spent his remaining years complaining about political correctness ruining business. Neither man learned anything from their experience. Greg Hammond was different. After his initial anger faded, he spent time reflecting on his actions. He worked for several years at a company owned by a Valkyrian woman. Being on the receiving end of assumptions and stereotypes opened his eyes. He began to understand how his behavior had hurt people. He reached out to some of the candidates he had rejected and apologized. Most did not respond, which he understood. But a few accepted his apology. One even wrote back saying that personal growth was always possible. That letter meant more to Hammond than any professional achievement. Hammond never got his career back. He had burned too many bridges, but he found peace in smaller things. He volunteered with organizations that helped disadvantaged job seekers. He spoke at schools about the importance of fair treatment. He tried to make amends for his past mistakes by helping others avoid them. It was a small redemption, but it was genuine. He proved that even people who had done wrong could change if they were willing to do the hard work. Kane Galactic Industries continued to grow and thrive. The company opened operations in 5 new systems over 2 years. Each expansion used the reformed hiring practices from the beginning. The company earned a reputation as the best place to work in the sector. Applications increased dramatically as word spread about the fair treatment and opportunities for advancement. The talent pool deepened. Innovation accelerated. Profits reached record levels. The business case for diversity was proven beyond any doubt. Other companies followed Kane Galactic Industries' example. Some genuinely wanted to improve. Others just wanted to avoid bad publicity. But even cynical adoption of fair practices produced benefits. Talented people who had been excluded got opportunities. Companies discovered employees with skills they had been overlooking. The entire sector became more dynamic and innovative as barriers fell. The changes Marcus started rippled outward far beyond his own company. Marcus reflected on everything that had happened during a quiet evening in his office on Nexus Prime. He looked out at the stars and thought about the journey. He had built an empire only to discover it was corrupted from within. He had gone undercover and experienced discrimination firsthand. He had fired people he once trusted. He had rebuilt systems and changed culture. It had been painful and difficult, but it had been worth it. The company now embodied the values he had always preached. Talent was recognized regardless of packaging. Opportunity was available to those who earned it through ability rather than connections. Diversity made the company stronger and more creative. These were not just words in a mission statement anymore. They were lived reality that shaped every decision. Marcus was proud of what they had accomplished, but he also knew the work was never truly finished. Each new hire brought the risk of someone who harbored prejudices. Each promotion created the possibility of a manager who would abuse their power. The audits and policies helped, but they were not perfect. Vigilance was required. The price of fairness was eternal attention. Marcus and his team would need to keep watching and correcting and improving for as long as the company existed. Lisa Torres joined him in his office that evening. She had been with him through the entire journey, from the first troubling reports to the undercover investigation, to the mass terminations and reforms. She asked him if he ever regretted how he handled it. If he thought he had been too harsh, Marcus shook his head. He said that discrimination was a cancer. You could not negotiate with cancer. You could not reform it gradually. You had to cut it out completely or it would spread and kill the patient. Lisa agreed but noted that some people criticized his methods, that they said he had destroyed lives over honest mistakes. Marcus said those people missed the point. The fired managers had not made honest mistakes. They had systematically excluded qualified people based on prejudice. They had betrayed the trust placed in them. They had damaged both individuals and the company. Their careers ended because they chose discrimination over integrity. That was not harsh. That was justice. He added that mercy had its place. People like Hammond who genuinely changed deserved a second chance at redemption. But that redemption had to be earned through real growth and amends.